Jesus, there's a lot of material here. And there's no end. It keeps going on and on and on. The different things that we can talk about. This morning, I want to talk about he said what and he did what. The question marks of what he said, where people just were blown away with that. And his words, his actions, his words were shocking in that they contrasted culture, and he made outrageous claims. Outrageous claims. He challenged the religious of the day, those who lean in more upon themselves rather than God. Religious people. Religious has to do with the systems and the different things that are there for us, but obviously in our own individual lives and in organizations, over time there becomes a reliance more upon me than there is upon God. And that's when we become religious. Jesus leaned in upon these people. He challenged them by the different things that he had said of these who had self-elevated themselves or had gotten caught up in the hierarchy of church and then in the system of the Jewish synagogues and the temples. He brought deep spiritual truth in practical ways in his words and the claims that he made. Last week, we looked at the foreshadowing words of Jesus, and I just want to recap that. He had gone with his family to Jerusalem at the age of 12 to celebrate the Passover feast. The Passover feast, that passing over of the death angel in Egyptian bondage, and how they went through that whole sacrificing the lamb and taking the blood and putting it over the doorpost, and that death angel passed over. The family was celebrating. Jesus was raised in Jewish custom and tradition and religion. And at the age of 12, he goes with his family to Jerusalem, about 100 kilometers south of his hometown, Nazareth. And he goes down there, and they have a celebration, and he goes, well, it doesn't go missing. The family starts out on the way back, and then they find he's missing. They're like, where is he? They go back to Jerusalem, and they're going, what are you doing? You're here in Jerusalem, like you're supposed to come home with us, or whatever the conversation was. And he says in Luke 2:49, he says this. He says, I must be in my Father's house. Wait a minute. Who's he talking about here? The words he said caused people to sit up, even his own family. And then we see the claim he makes in Luke 4:18. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to bring good news. He has sent me to proclaim captives will be released, blind will see, oppressed will be set free. And then verse 21 of chapter 4, he says this. He says, the scriptures you've heard has been fulfilled this very day. He's quoting from the Old Testament in Isaiah. This is familiar to many of us here this morning. Recap of last week. But he says this, and then he's talking about me, upon me, anointed me, sent me. And then he says, what you've heard has been fulfilled this very day. Wait a minute. His self-proclamation of being the Messiah, the one that had been promised, that would come and do these very things, set the captives free. Obvious to those hearing the words, we see that in verse 29, they're outraged. They're just like, this is like, what in the world? They jump up and they start to mob him, and they take him up to the cliff by the town, and they're ready to throw him over. But then it says he just passed through them. And it just wasn't his words that caused a stir, it was his actions. They had equal weight in causing people to lean in and to react. John 13, I want to read that for us this morning. 13, 1-5. I got it marked here somewhere. And it says, before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. And he had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. And it was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. And Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and would return to God. We have to understand what's being said here. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything. I'm just saying that for emphasis. We remind ourselves of the power and authority that Jesus has. He knew this, he recognized this, and so the next verse is absolutely contrasting to that. He's talking about authority and power over everything in this world. And then he says in verse 4, so he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and he poured water into the basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. Isn't that contrasting? Talking about power and authority and, all this stuff, glamour, smoke, lights, fog machines going off, the whole bit that churches do nowadays. And then all of a sudden he gets up in an act of humility, washes feet. I have all the power and authority. What did they expect? Like we do. We expect Jesus to step up. We expect him to come in and just go, bam, okay, come on, Barry, let's go, right? Barry needs some help. I need some help. We all need some help. And that's what we're expecting sometimes. And yet, there's a humble response that Jesus gives us. But it's so profound in what he does. Unthinkable. The rabbi, the teacher, the one that they have followed around now for quite some time and watching his preaching and teaching. And he does what? He bends his knee before the disciples. He gets down in front of them. He gets his hands dirty. And those people back in that day, they didn't wear shoes and socks like we do. It was open sandals or some kind of shoes. It was hot land. It was dusty. It was dry. And then can you imagine pouring of the water on those feet? What would it be? It would become muddy until they become clean. You ever seen those shows about some people's feet? Oh, that's just nasty, right? Feet are nasty. Some people's feet are just, I don't want to see your feet. But Jesus took that position and did the unthinkable. He wasn't caught up in what others had expected of him. Think about the expectations we place on the Lord sometimes. Isn't that true? Because what did Mary do when Jesus went missing? She says, "What have you done to us?" She made it all about her, right? We too have that propensity to make this all about us at times. And when we do, we place expectations upon how Jesus ought to act towards us and what he needs to do for us. Is it true? Yeah. Jesus here responds in a very different manner than what we would think and the way it should be done. And another thing he did, if we turn back to Matthew, in Matthew 19, in verses 13 and 15. One day, some parents brought their children to Jesus so he could lay hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples scolded the parents for bothering him. But Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me. Don't stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are like these children." And he placed his hands on their heads and blessed them before he left. Well, time's not up quite yet. I got a couple more minutes yet. So. How audacious is that? The children are coming and they're going to bother the rabbi. Again, thinking this is Jesus. It's amazing how in our church culture, in our religious cultures, we puff leaders up, isn't it? And these people were no different. And when we do it in our churches today, we're no different from these early disciples. So let us glean from them and their examples. You see, children in that day, especially 0 to 5, there was a high mortality rate amongst children. Children didn't, high amount of that would pass away because of disease or whatever it would be, health. And so, you think about children in that day and age too, and you think about the household. The household was all about manual labor of what they did to make sustenance and make their living. Children, what are children? Children diapers got to be changed. Take a lot of time. They take a lot of energy. They take a lot of, leaning into them, looking after them. And you know what? In this culture, there was not a high value placed on these young children. And yet Jesus leans in and he welcomes them. And he actually blesses them. You see, we need to understand the thing of what's going on here. A third of the population in Jesus' day would have been children. Yet they didn't have a high value placed upon them by society. Isn't that kind of strange? But look at our society and how it's broken down, or how we might break it down into its little segments. And the devaluing that we do for those maybe that aren't contributing, how we think they ought to contribute to society even. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Are you listening between the lines today? About how this is so relevant for us to understand what humility is all about, because Jesus reaches into those who are not maybe capable or don't provide as what we think in society or haven't got there yet. And Jesus leans in on that. That's powerful. It's amazing, excuse me, that fragility and weakness actually can dispel people. I can't do that. That's too messy. I can't do that. Those people are stinky. Gets quiet, doesn't it? Because we look at our own actions and our own words and our own way we value people or value those in our society, doesn't it? We distance ourselves And we step away from it and we go, that's not my gifting. That's not, has nothing about gifting and ability. It does, but it has more to do with heart condition, of how we value people. Jesus shows us the example by his actions of who he values. He values those in our society that are less than. Here's another profound thing he does. Great miracle of action when he feeds the 5,000. He feeds all these people from what? A child's lunch. Do you think Jesus is telling us something here? I think so. He embraced the weak. What did he say in Matthew 5:3? Blessed are those who are poor in spirit. He says he embraced them. He became the champion for the downtrodden. After all, what did he self-proclaim? And when he quoted from Isaiah, what did he say? Again, reminding ourselves of, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, anointed me to bring good news, sent me to proclaim to the captives will be released. The blind will see, the oppressed will be set free. And he lives those words out in action towards those who are exactly that. You see, God desires us to have that faith of a child, to be like children, unhindered, uncomplicated, simple but oh so profound, and awe, wonder, and just simple trust. And these two acts unveil for us the powerful impact of this word that we have a hard time with. I do. It's called humility. Because society will puff us up. We will puff ourselves up. I'd like to think I'm a pretty good ice hockey goalie. Actually, you know what? I'm a very good ice hockey goalie. Do you see what I did there? Yeah. And what's really good is people will come alongside, they'll go by me and they'll slap my pads and they'll go, "Great save, Johnny." I go, "Yes, it was." We all have that propensity. Humility wasn't popular in Jesus' day either. We strive for strength because we think when we lift ourselves up, that's strong. And we see humility as a weakness. Our Western culture sees strength as the one at the top in the hierarchical chain of whatever, the one at the front of the room. Our Western culture has kind of taken that on too, to lift up the pastor or the one who might be behind the pulpit at times. What about these spiritual people online these days that we can listen to who are somewhere else in a distant world of ours on the planet, but yet we listen to them, and what do? We elevate them. Tell me it's not true. The loudest in the room usually is the most anointed. Actually, they're not. Got other words for those people. I didn't say anything. There's a really good book. I would recommend you read this. It's called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And Jim Collins evaluates and looks at leadership, and he looks at companies, and he's also a faith-based person. But what he does is he gives us this picture of all these companies and businesses in the world that we would know by name. And we see the escalation of them in popularity or of success. And it's a graph, and we can see these companies, and it goes up, 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 up. And those are good companies. And the book Good to Great is where he looks at these companies that were good, and then they kept on climbing, and they kept on growing, and they became great companies. And then he shows the picture of the contrast. These good companies, successful, and all of a sudden, poof, they become nothing. And what he did is he did a dive into leadership. And the companies that got to this place that were here and then all of a sudden just plummeted were companies built on one personality, one person's lifetime. They either aged out and retired or they passed away, and everything was built upon them. And so when it got to a certain point, the company went, pooh, no more. The other companies were built good, and they became great because they had a different type of leadership style. You know what the leadership style was? It was humility. And it was based on something where we look at from Scripture. It talks about servant leadership. The leader of these companies that became great and these churches that became great were led by leaders that were collaborative, that they led a team of individuals around a table, but each one of those people were leaders in their own right with their special giftings and abilities and talents. And this one person just had the ability to rally them around, and they kept this company going, and it became a great company. You see, even the world understands the aspect and the value of humility when it comes to business. Where do they get that from? Hello. And we know this stuff. And I'm just laying it out for us today to see that it works. It can work, not only in your life, but it works outside in society as well. When there's humility, people are more apt to lean in and listen, and it attracts them. You guys know that because you've been around people that repel you in many ways because they're anything but humble. I've often told this story. I was in Bible college, and one of the guys, we had a collective, small few group of us that went through college together, and we became best buddies. And one guy comes in to the room, and everybody's there, and we turn around and look, and he comes in, and he's so excited, and he says, "I totally understand what my spiritual gift is now." And he's kind of that guy that's, loud, and he's kind of like, and he's always telling you what he's doing. And, when he was going to graduate, he was talking about all the different churches that were after him and all this kind of stuff. And he goes, "I finally found my gifting." And we go, "What?" He goes, "It's humility." Well, we had to pick ourselves up off the floor of that one too, But we can call ourselves humble, but are we really? You see, Jesus proclaimed humility, but he acted it out. And he showed us the way of that. And so the thing is we need congruence. We need equal. If we say we're humble, we need to act humble. And Jesus was that example for us. Man, there's so much more that I got to say this morning. There's some scripture verses, and I want you to look at these and read, these on your leisure. But in Philippians 2, in 12, it says that we're to take on the same attitude of Jesus, and then it's like verses 1 to 11. So Philippians 2, 1 to 11. Paul is talking about how Jesus laid the foundation. What did he do? Because he became nothing. He became nothing. And then it was God who lifted him up. It was God who lifted him up. If we look at, that's foundationally, practically, we see James. James is in his opening to his letter. He talks about what? He says, I'm a slave of the Lord Jesus Christ. He's talking about coming to a perspective of humility. And then we can read chapter 4, verses 1 to 10. Again, just read this on your leisure. But it's all talking about humility as an act. It's an act of obedience on our part. And that's another thing, discipline and obedience, because humility is not just a given. We've got to work at it. But what humility does for us, okay, Jesus is telling us, be humble. This is how you can be humble, but the choice is ours. But what it brings to us is something that we can't gain any other way. How many different times I've gone on a short-term missions trip with the idea that we're going to go and bless these people because we have so much and we're going to give to these ones who don't have so much. And how many different times have I been humbled in that missions trip? How many times that the Lord has spoken to me about the need for humility? A bunch of youth pastors went down to Mexico City, and we were going to go down and we were going to go to a local area with a local church, and we were going to try to figure out if we were going to bring short-term missions teams down here, what it would look like. So we went down to begin with to see the lay of the land and to just get organized and plan things out and everything else too. Very Western cultures, right? So we go down there, and it had been raining in the area. And it was outside Mexico City, and this church had been built right in the middle of a cornfield. You'd have to walk through the cornfield with little trails and stuff. And then all of a sudden you came out, it was like a maze, right? Walk through the maze, and all of a sudden, there's a church. And we go into the church. Well, it had been raining, and everything down there is made out of concrete and tile and everything else on the floors. And so in the sanctuary, it just was an absolute mess. Like, think about, boots walking through, shoes walking through the muddy field, and then walking into this thing. You don't take your shoes off at the door. You just walk right in. And it had been raining for a time. It had stopped raining. Sun had come out. It's hot and humid. Everything's drying out in the sanctuary. This mud is now like concrete, right? And so we said, what can we do for you? We came and we said, what can we do to serve you? And we were preachers, we were leaders, we were teachers, we were organizers, we were administrators. And they said to us, the sanctuary needs to be mopped out on the floor. And you should have seen how indignant some of these guys were. What? What do you mean? And then we had one guy who was going to then step up, and he was going to tell everybody how we were to clean this floor. We're all standing around looking at each other going, okay, whatever, let's, And I'll tell you what, when you got a lot of egos in the room, you can imagine, right? Our host saw this happening, and he just shook his head, and he just said, there's the mops, there's the buckets, let's get at it, guys. And it was still standing there. What do we do? And he says, start, blah, blah, blah. And we're going, and then, everybody's like, well, I think it would be more efficient if we did it like this. We had to all stop. And we recognized what was going on here. They asked us to mop the floor, and they actually told us how to do it. You know what? Just do it. Put your own stuff aside. Put your own self-proclaimed elevation of your loftiness aside and just do the work. For a number of years, we'd go down to the LA Dream Center in Los Angeles, and we would take short-term missions teams down there, and we were going down, and we would go do ministry. We would go down there to serve. There was one opportunity in the evening where we had to go down there. Where's Aaron? Is he there? Aaron. Aaron remembers this stuff. We'd go down together. Aaron, I've probably known Aaron the longest of anybody in this sanctuary, in the city, right? 22 years now or something like that. He was a young adult in my young adult ministry when I first came to Saskatoon at Elam. And Aaron was there, and we were going to go out that night. We were going to do street witnessing. We do such funny things as church, don't we, sometimes, right? So this was like a group of people that had come from, Saskatchewan prairies. We're in the city. We're on Hollywood Boulevard. And we got off the bus, and the guy said, we're going to go down here, and we're going to do this. And they get off the bus, and there's a big crowd of people, and then they take off. Well, Aaron and I looked at each other, and we went, no, let's go that way. So these people just down the boulevard. Aaron and I went the other way. And Aaron and I looked at each other, and I think we made a little bit of a thing and said, listen, we're not going to pound any people over the head with the Bible tonight. We said, we're going to walk along the boulevard, and if there's people that we can engage with just through a simple hello and a smile, remember? And how many different people that we were able to connect with. There was one couple that were there on the street, and they had come to Hollywood, and they're trying to do life. They're trying to figure it out. And we just came alongside them. We blessed them. At the end of the conversation, we'd ask to pray for them or over them. There was one gentleman that we met, and we had been talking to this man for quite some time. He was a street guy, probably a little stinky if you got a little close to him, maybe, or whatever. Dirty, unkempt. He's a big guy, too, if I remember right. And we had kind of been talking to him for a while. And he says to me, he says, come here. And I'm standing a little bit, and he goes, no, come here. And I get a little closer. He goes, no, come here. And I get right in. I thought he was going to whisper something to me. And he reaches out and gives me a big kiss right on the cheek right here. I'm like, whoa. At first, and you know what? Then I think I hugged him after that. You know what? Sometimes we never know what humility and the doors that will be open to that. Weekly, I see a Bible college professor, person who's going to go for their master's in linguistics. I see Bible college degree people. I see people of all walks of life from our church going over, making a meal for these kids on Tuesday night when they maybe could be staying at home when it's minus whatever, making the sacrifice, whatever. And then I watch what they do, and they're coloring with a young kid right beside them, just in a coloring book. Or leading them in a game. Or just visiting with them. It's humility in practice. It's not thinking more of ourselves than we ought. And I think that's pretty powerful when we follow Jesus. Jeff, I'd like you to come back with team, and I'd like us to sing that song, Christ is Enough. And as they're playing that song this morning, I'd like if you would please stand with me this morning. And as I've been speaking, and as that song and that worship time was happening, I believe that God, through His Spirit, was speaking to people as well. The song is proclaiming who Jesus is. We've been sharing from the Word who Jesus claimed who He was, and how He desires to reach in to your life. And maybe you've been looking at, and what we've been going after in this series is that He is all I need. And I don't know what else you've been looking to in your life for what you need. But maybe this morning, through a simple proclamation, making it where you stand, or I invite you even to come to the front as a proclamation for yourself that, you know what, I mean business with this. And I need to come to a place where I truly understand Jesus is all I need, and what Jesus can do for me in setting me free. Bondages, addictions, whatever it is. Man, there's lots of nice programs out there, but the foundation of everything that is going to sustain us and keep us from the bondage of addiction or whatever it might be, and whatever we are holding on to in this life, people, is Jesus. He's all I need. So as we sing this song this morning, we invite you to come to the front just as a symbol for yourself. I'll be here to pray with you as well. And we'll have our prayer team that can just gather around you and believe with you that you would cement this in your life, that this is the day, and you can write it down in your calendar, where I made another declaration of faith in Jesus. I don't know about you, but we're told to do that daily. But today, this is an opportunity for us. Christ is enough for us.
Christ is my reward, all of my devotion.